Добрый день, уважаемые участники. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. Can you hear me well? Can you please put the pluses in the chat box so that I can make sure that everything goes smoothly? Добрый день, уважаемые участники. Меня хорошо видно, слышно. Если все отлично, поставьте, пожалуйста, плюсы. Я хочу проверить, что у нас нет каких-то проблем. Отлично, я вижу. Спасибо большое, я буду продолжать. My name is Asel Kazakova, and I have an honor today to moderate the official opening of the 10th Central Asian Trade Forum. Welcome. Меня зовут Асель Кажакова, и для меня сегодня большая честь модерировать открытие 10-го Центральноазиатского торгового форума. Добро пожаловать! Before we start, I have a short announcement on the language issues. Прежде чем мы начнем, у меня есть небольшое сообщение по языкам. Если вы используете приложение Zoom, то у вас есть внизу возможность синхронного перевода. Вы можете переключаться на значке «Глобус», вы можете включить удобный для вас язык и слушать сегодняшнее мероприятие на русском или английском языках. Если вы говорите на обоих языках, ничего делать не нужно. Вы услышите трансляцию на языке оригинала. На сайте форума также есть живой чат для технической поддержки. Мои коллеги сейчас скинут название сайта в чат-бокс, вы можете его посмотреть. There is a simultaneous translation available for those
in the chat box.
Application of Zoom. You can find the globe sign and choose English translation if you speak English and Russian if you speak Russian. If you speak both languages, you don't have to do anything and you will listen to the original sound. There is also a live chat for the technical support available on the forum's website. My colleagues will be sending the link now to the chat box, so you can check it there. You can also see the live broadcasting on the YouTube channel, which is also now available in the chat box, and it is will be broadcasting in English and Russian languages, both. Вы также можете подключиться к YouTube-трансляции на русском и на английском языках. Мои коллеги сейчас скинут ссылки в чат-бокс для того, чтобы вы выбрали тот язык, который вам удобен. Записи всех выступлений будут доступны к концу рабочего дня на нашем сайте. All the recordings of the event will be available at the evening of the working day at the website as well. Дальше я буду модерировать форум на русском языке. Поэтому...
Okay, so the forum will be moderated in Russian, so please switch to the language which is comfortable for you. So we are finished with some organizational issues, and now I will start official opening ceremony of the 10th Jubilee Forum. And for the first time, it is happening in the virtual format. And while we're waiting for another guest, let's us remember how our previous forums for the previous 9 years. I would like to ask my colleagues to turn on the video. Thank you very much. On behalf of the International Development Agency of the United States of America, I would like to welcome all the participants of the forum and announce 10th Central Asian Trade Forum open. About 100 speakers will be presenting during 5 days of the forum, and more than 4,000 participants from 39 countries. You will have 5 days of interactive sessions. You can participate in discussions on adaptation of the regional supply, the restoring of tourism in Central Asia, development of the regional energy market, and possibilities of the online trade, creating private government trade, and many other issues. I would like to pass the word to the Ambassador of the United States of America in the Republic of Kazakhstan, Mr. William Moser. Mr. Moser recorded his address in Russian, and let us watch it. Dear colleagues, can you please turn it on? Ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers and participants, on behalf of the United States Embassy in the Republic of Kazakhstan, it is an honor for me to welcome you online at the opening ceremony of the 10th Annual Central Asian Trade Forum. 10 years ago, the idea of this trade forum was born based on the belief that improvement of trade cooperation can bring more stable, prosperous, and interconnected Central Asia. During the last 10 years, the Trade Forum brought together more than 5,000 officials, representatives of business, and experts from more than 30 countries to exchange knowledge, ideas, new areas of development, expanding contacts, and business. Trade operations between Central Asian countries during this time doubled during this time and reached about $6 billion annually. During the last 5 years, our events of business connectivity led to increase of trade between Central Asian countries and Afghanistan for about $244 million. And during this period, we also witnessed revival of regional cooperation. Borders were opened after many years of closure, and the flights were renewed between capitals, and countries started discussing the possibilities of further expansion of trade, regional trade. For example, diplomatic platform C5+1 was created 5 years ago under the auspices of the government of the United States of America, and it unites 5 Central Asian countries and U.S. for discussing of the issues which impose mutual interest. The 10th Trade Forum of this year will add to the restoring of economy after pandemic. During panel sessions, you will discuss impact of pandemic over each sector of economy, and also discuss unique measures to overcome this impact, how companies can survive and prepare for the growth after the end of this pandemic. So U.S. is ready to provide support to the Central Asian countries in the process of restoring their economies. Although 2020 it was not a simple year but today I'm sure that working together we will overcome current crisis. Trade was never a zero-sum game. Thanks to our mutual efforts, everybody can receive benefit from honest and transparent trade cooperation. So cooperation is important not only for business, but improvement of trade relations strengthens economy and independency of the Central Asian countries, creating more opportunities for young people and women who is a part of a working force of this region. I would like to again welcome you at this 10th Annual Central Asian Trade Forum, and I wish you productive interaction and good health to all of you, so you can soon again see each other in person. Thank you very much. I'm sure that we all need good health today. During 10 years of forum existence, the government of Central Asian countries participated the most actively, in this forum and helped assist it, and it's for a good forum. And this forum is not an exclusion. I would like to welcome especially representatives of governments of Central Asian countries and thank for their interest and constant support. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Azamat Askalary, who is the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Trade and Integration, the Republic of Kazakhstan. Mr. Azamat Askalary participated in the previous forum in Shymkent city. I would like to pass the floor to you. Hello. Respectful ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Republic of Kazakhstan, I would like to welcome you to the 10th Jubilee Annual Central Asian Trade Forum.
Development for organizing the forum in the online format, regardless of the worldwide pandemic. It is an open discussion between countries that will precede the way for the sooner restoration and reinforcing of trade relations among countries. Странами придается повышенное внимание развитию региональной кооперации как в сфере торговли, так и в сфере промышленности. Лидером нации Елбасы еще ранее была поставлена.
The leader of a nation, Елбасы, imposed already the task to increase the total ambitious, task of increasing total trade of Kazakhstan between Central Asian countries up to $7 billion of US. Unfortunately, pandemic corrected these plans, changed these plans, and we see that during the previous months we can see it decreased by 14%. But prior to COVID, dynamics showed good growth, and we believe in increased growth of trade. During the recent visit of the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Sklar, there was a roadmap signed on the joint cooperation development, which has 35 joint contracts. At the border of Uzbekistan, we will build International Center for Trade Economic Cooperation of Central Asia, which will provide development of the modern formats of international, regional, wholesale and retail trade, expedited custom processes, and the veterinary and phytosanitary control. I'm sure that the Central Asian region has to have one front in attracting international capitals. With this regard, Kazakhstan created all the necessary infrastructure, which includes International Financial Center Astana, investment preferences, and we are ready to become the gates for investors into our region. Besides, strengthening of the trade cooperation between our countries has to be nivelated of the negative effect of the traditional global chains. Today, Kazakhstan is ready to propose, more than 60 different trades for $486 million US dollars. Pandemic demonstrated the need to develop digitalization of all the areas of life, including electronic trade. With this regard, we propose to develop effective legal base which will allow to simplify the online trade, provide financing, and improve the trust for the online trade and fight cybercrime. I would like to state that the government developed the project of the state program of the trade development for 2025, which has special attention to development of the border and regional trade. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the forum, we pay a great attention to interaction of Central Asian track and current forum as one more proof demonstration of importance of development of the regional cooperation and creating Central Asian brands in the world markets. I would like to wish you success in the forum work and constructive discussions. Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Thank you. And we proceed further. And to our virtual scene, I invite the first Deputy Minister of Investments and International Trade, Mr. Laziz Kudratov. Please, Laziz Shavkatovich, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, dear participants of the forum, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to participate in this 10th Central Asian Forum. Using this opportunity, I would like to express gratitude to the Agency of International Development of the United States of America and Republic of Kazakhstan for organizing this event at such a high level. With satisfaction, I would like to state that during recent years, we managed to bring international cooperation between Central Asian countries to the high-quality level and fill it with the significant projects and improve effectiveness of interaction in all areas of life. These regular events and meetings help open and friendly dialogue, which covers more and more aspects of our multifaceted relations. Annual meetings of Central Asian Trade Forum are a safe platform to discuss important issues of economic development and new areas of partnership. I would like to briefly share our vision of development of the regional economic development. Trade investment ties can become drivers of our interaction. For this, we have all the necessary everything necessary. During recent years, technical and consulting work of United States of America increased, which is directed towards strengthening of the energy, transport, and business relations of Central Asian countries. We have to stick to simple and clear principle, maximize joint efforts on effective use of the allocated funds for the needs of Central Asia. Regional economic interaction is the road to bigger market, workplaces, and even distribution of resources. Due to the recent changes due to COVID pandemic, we think it's reasonable to focus on the foreign areas. First is the digital economy development, active introduction of the online trade, electronic services in the export-import operations, customs documents, standardization. We hope for interaction of the Silicon Valley companies with the support of relevant American programs. Then consolidation of national transport strategies and creation of uniform Central Asian hub. I'm sure that strengthening of transit potential of our region will help creating new trans-Afghan transport corridor, which will connect rail corridors, Central Asia, Eurasia, and open up the short access to producers of our region, seaports in India. Third thing, stimulation of innovation in agriculture, expand of export potential with added value goods. Here we have two priorities. First is yield, improving the yield, and energy-saving technologies introduction, world standards in processing, and finding new markets of the commodities. And the fourth last proposal is improving energy potential of Central Asia. We are interested in improving energy effectiveness of our economies, our industries, active use of renewable energy sources. We are sure that tight regional cooperation will help full development of potential, not each country of Central Asia, but as Central Asia as one market and one destination for foreign investors. And at the end, I would like to wish all participants of today's event strong health, good health, and propose to hold the 11th forum in Tashkent. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all good business cooperation.
Thank you, Lazi Shavhatovich. I think that the organizers of the forum will consider your proposal, and it is really nice to know that we still hope that in 2021 we'll be able to go back to the offline format. So thank you again. I'd like to say that despite the fact that everyone's working online, but virtual format has not become an impediment. It's actually expanded the borders and opened up the possibilities for other people from other countries to take part in this forum. Like I said in the beginning, 39 countries, people from 39 countries are participating in this forum. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor to Mr. Mikhail Janilidze. During the period of active economic reforms in Georgia, Mr. Janilidze worked as a Minister of Foreign Affairs and then as a Vice Prime Minister of Georgia. I'd like to ask my colleagues to turn on the video, and Mr. Janilidze is going to be presented in English, so please choose the language of your convenience. Thank you.
Participants, it is my pleasure to join this very important forum in Central Asia. I would like to start by congratulating the organizers with the 10th anniversary of this trade forum. This year's gathering is taking place in an online format like everything else nowadays, which is a challenge but opportunity at the same time. I believe that countries which move quickly in this direction will be successful in post-pandemic era. It is great to see that the governments in Central Asia are making important steps towards global and regional integration. It is well reflected in active cooperation with the WTO and such regional partnerships as CAREC, C5+1, talks with the United States, and dialogue with Japan. Moving towards the creation of an open, transparent, and seamless Central Asian market will make the region attractive for the foreign business, capital, and technology, with that achieving diversification of economic sectors and raising competitiveness of the whole region. Here I would like to talk about Georgian example, which has gone through 3 waves of trade, economic policy, and public service reforms since independence, which has led to broad international recognition of its business and investment climate. As a positive example of a result of the regional trade agreement can serve the textile industry development in Georgia after signing of the free trade agreement with Turkey. Right after the start of implementation of the FTA, Turkish companies, textile companies, decided to enter into partnerships with the Georgian businesses to develop textile factories in the neighboring to Turkey region of Georgia. The reason was the labor availability, open business environment, low taxes, and low electricity cost. These factors, together with the free access to the market and excellent customs cooperation between the countries, made the textile manufacturing in Georgia profitable. The development of the industry started only with few factories, and having seen the success soon, the government of Georgia decided to support further development of the industry and its integration into global value chain with the special programs such as skills upgrade, access to finance, business consulting, and internationalization. Today, the industry is strongly developed not only in the neighboring region of Turkey, but in other parts of Georgia. There are not only joint ventures, but Georgian companies successfully developing international business and moving up into the global value chains, having direct contracts with the top international brands, as well as developing its own successful brands. Based on this example, in 2014, Georgia, having free trade agreements with all the ex-Soviet countries, Turkey and the EU, decided to develop further its manufacturing sector. At that time, I was working as a Deputy Minister of Economy and joined the government task force to find the ways which would not distort the competition on the market, be discriminatory, subjective, violate our international obligations, and create a source of corruption. It was not an easy task, but the final solution was simple. We reformed the National Investment Agency to create a new bureaucracy and rebranded it into Enterprise Georgia, which was tasked to run Produce in Georgia program and coordinate different stakeholders involved in the implementation of the program. The government has decided to enter into public-private partnerships with the private banks and consulting companies and made them stakeholders of the program. This program and the agency have been strongly supported by the donor organizations since the beginning, including USAID, GIZ, and others. In this partnership, the role of private consulting companies is to help entrepreneurs develop sound business plans, and the role of private banks is to assess the financial viability of the project. After all this happens, Enterprise Georgia automatically issues collateral for the project and subsidizes a loan during the startup period up to 24 months. Government of Georgia is able to support the project with the state property, offering to any project and needed property under investment obligations. It is important to note that these programs are open to any business, including foreign, interested in participation. As a result of this program, in the period of 2014-2019, 359 new projects were supported. Total investments made up to 300 million USD and more than 13,000 new jobs were created. Projects supported by the agency are in such manufacturing sectors as construction, paper and packaging, food and drinks, metals, plastics, pharmaceuticals, furniture, and others. This success is even more significant as it is a result of the public-private partnership. And PPPs in the context of trade facilitation and promotion is a topic of this forum, and I strongly believe that the Produce in Georgia program can be a good case to look into and consider its application in Central Asia. Together with these programs, Government of Georgia has accelerated infrastructure development for the support of trade, tourism, transit sectors, and Georgia's regional integration agenda. When it comes to Georgia's regional integration, besides the example of Turkey already mentioned, Georgia works closely with Armenia and Azerbaijan. For example, with Azerbaijan together, we have managed to develop transport and energy projects of inter-regional importance, with that attracting the world's largest companies and investors. These projects are very important for the Central Asian region in general, as they create stable corridor and access to the Western markets. At the same time, Azerbaijan and Georgia are working closely on developing not only infrastructure, but the supportive administrative cooperation. This cooperation will further strengthen the region's transport connectivity and trade position with such projects as advanced transit system and customs information common exchange, which will be a common electronic transit system using a single declaration and a single guarantee mechanism, and construction of a joint border crossing point, which will foster the development of countries' transit and logistics capacity. Dear participants, the document prepared by the Economist Intelligence Unit for this forum, with a big list of policy options and recommendations, has provided good food for thought and discussions. Together with that, the agenda and the list of participants are set to make the forum a success. And I would like to finish by wishing you all a good work. Stay healthy and safe. Thank you.
Мы благодарим господина
We would like to
Джанигидзе.
thank Mr. Janigidze. And I am moving on. I would like to turn the floor to the next invited guest, Mr. William Thompson. Mr. William Thompson is the head of the Eurasian Office of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and he will also have a video address. He will be addressing the participants of the forum from Paris. He will be speaking English, and will ask my colleagues to put on the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and greetings from Paris from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's an enormous pleasure to join you, even virtually. I am always happy to participate in the Central Asia Trade Forum, and I'm very grateful to USAID and all of the organizers for this opportunity. What I'd like to do in the next few minutes is, first of all, to say a bit about the global context we find ourselves in this extraordinary year of 2020. Then to look at some of the key policy considerations, lessons for Central Asia, and finally end with some reflections on where Central Asian governments might need to be looking for their next wave of reforms. We're clearly caught up in the midst of an unprecedented global crisis. The closest parallel that comes to mind in modern history would have to be the Great Influenza following the First World War. But of course, the world after the Great War was a very different place, much less interconnected in terms of flows of goods, people, rules, institutions. 100 years later, we're much better equipped to manage the public health consequences of the pandemic, but in fact, the economic shock has been absolutely tremendous. The OECD this year expects global GDP to shrink by about 4.5% in its baseline scenario. All of the G20 economies except China are expected to shrink. We anticipate a recovery, an uncertain recovery in 2021, perhaps reaching 5% global growth. What does that mean? It means that at the end of 2021, global GDP is likely to be equal to what it was at the end of 2019. That is equivalent, with reference to the kind of trend scenario prior to the pandemic, to the loss of 7.5% to 8% of world GDP, the disappearance of economies the size of France and Germany combined. The downside projections actually anticipate losses as great as 13% over the 2 years, although we have an optimistic scenario that sees them limited to just under 5%. In any case, it's the gravest crisis economically that we've experienced since the Great Depression. Worldwide, we could see as many as 90 million people pushed into extreme poverty, a 14% increase in 1 year, reversing the gains of many years, and more may follow in 2021. In Central Asia alone, the World Bank estimates that perhaps 1.4 million people could be added to the numbers of those living in poverty. Since this is a trade conference, though, I will mention one other bit of what I see as good news, which is that global value chains have proved more resilient, more robust than many had feared at the onset of the crisis. Trade to GDP has held up fairly well. We've certainly seen some tremendous trade shocks, but in many ways, the worst fears that were expressed at the start of this crisis haven't been realized. What this means for Central Asia in particular is not only a continued fight to contain the pandemic and deal with its consequences, but it means that commodity prices are going to remain soft on the back of weak investment, lower trade, and slow recovery around the world, particularly slow recovery, I suspect, of consumption. That means, of course, that its principal exports are going to be delivering less than they once did. And the evidence that we see at the OECD, and there's similar evidence and analysis elsewhere, suggests that the output losses in commodity exporting countries following negative shocks persist. This is a critical point for Central Asia. When prices recover, demand recovers, we don't typically see a rapid rebound in output growth to the same rates as we're seeing before, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Globally speaking, I want to outline a few policy considerations before focusing on Central Asia for a few minutes. First of all, perhaps the key lesson of the crisis is the need to avoid premature tightening. That critically means that fiscal support has to be designed in such a way that it can be targeted and sustained long enough for the recovery to establish itself. Countries that started this crisis expecting it to be brief may well have launched a kind of bazooka of money into their economies, but the trouble is they need less of a big bang and more of a long haul. To boost confidence, policymakers need to work on improving healthcare, maintaining fiscal and monetary support, and above all, helping people and firms with ongoing changes, helping people to find jobs, and helping firms to limit bankruptcies. We can expect bankruptcies to peak probably in the spring and summer of next year. Typically, it's 4 to 6 quarters after the onset of a crisis. It's much easier for governments to find ways to support large firms in distress than small firms. Setting down conditions, agreeing tailored exit plans for very large firms is easier. It's tougher for small firms, but they have been hit hardest. Small and medium enterprises bear the brunt of this. And across Central Asia, that is the heart of the private sector. The risk is that the development of the private sector in the region is going to be put back substantially by current events. And that points to the need to find ways to limit those bankruptcies. One option, for example, would be converting certain loans into grants in return for higher property tax rates going forward. Now, a word about foreign investment. The OECD expects global FDI flows to contract 30 to 40% this year. And the recovery in FDI is likely to be slow. That puts a premium on investment policies, and especially on investor retention in countries that are competing for increasingly scarce investment resources. Above all, that implies strict adherence to the principle of national treatment and the avoidance of measures that are seen to discriminate against foreign investors. At the OECD, we're working actively with governments and with investment promotion agencies on these issues in Central Asia. And what we find across the region, above all, is the need to close the gap between de jure frameworks for investment, the legal framework on paper, which is often dramatically improved in recent years and frequently looks rather attractive, and the de facto implementation and application of that legislation on the ground. That is what investors will be watching. Now, some other implications for Central Asia. Well, most Central Asian countries did respond early and strongly to the threat in terms of public health and economic measures. To the extent that they were able, we see big differences, of course, as a function not only of readiness to acknowledge the threat, but also fiscal capacity. The virus has been contained better perhaps in Central Asia than in much of the world, but it still remains an enormous public health challenge. And the economic shock through the trade channel began to hit Central Asian countries, as we know, in the first quarter, long before the first cases were reported in the region. As I said, support will have to be sustained, so policy support packages will need more attention to targeting and sustainability. Short-term prospects, of course, will depend on the ability of social safety nets to sustain household consumption, the ability of the banking sector to provide liquidity to firms, and the ability of governments, particularly in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, but elsewhere as well, to address the needs of the informal sector. And restrictions on movement, difficulties with repatriation, difficulties remaining where they stay are a particular challenge. But the problem is also that informal workers have low savings, poor access to healthcare, poor access to other social services, and they are often less well plugged in to any kind of public support packages. They are both more vulnerable to the health and economic impact of the pandemic, and they are also more difficult to target with government support. It's particularly striking when we have severe lockdown arrangements, because of course that means, on the one hand, a large part of the informal sector is prevented from working, which is not something that happened in previous economic crises. And at the same time, those who are able to work are often able to work because they're in essential services, waste disposal, and activities like that, which are essential, but they are also less well able to protect themselves. They have poor access to protective equipment, and they're often therefore exposed. So an important strand of OECD work right now in Central Asia and elsewhere is focused on finding ways to develop policies that will address the needs of informal workers and informal firms. Simple examples will suffice. Of course, more universal access to essential services is critical, and more universal access even to income support where it's required. But on the business side, for example, some measures of fiscal support, such as can help informal firms more than others. The assumption that informal firms are totally unaffected by the tax system is erroneous. Waivers on things like rentals of public property, utilities, things that even in the informal sector firms pay can often make a big difference. Whereas if one focuses on things like profit tax and payroll taxes, these are things that have really no impact on the informal sector. The final distributional point I want to make concerns women. Looking across the world, the evidence shows us very clearly that men are far more likely to die of COVID than women in almost all countries. There are very few exceptions. And they may even be more likely to be infected, although the evidence there is less clear. However, the evidence to date suggests that the socioeconomic impacts of the crisis are falling predominantly on women. With confinement measures and lockdowns, we have seen dramatic increases in domestic violence, including in countries in Central Asia, where there have been sharp increases in reports and cases recorded, sometimes tripling even. There's the increased burden of unpaid domestic labor, which falls predominantly on women as a result of school closures and other confinement measures. The labor market effects of the crisis are particularly profound. Once again, as with informal workers, there's a bit of a bifurcation. We have sectors in which women are predominantly employed where they're keeping their jobs, but that's because they're working in sectors like healthcare where they are particularly exposed to risk. But many of the most profoundly affected sectors, like tourism, like retail, tend to have disproportionately female workforces, and they are losing jobs. Women across the region are more likely to report loss of income. They're more likely to report loss of employment than are men in the current crisis. And the problem is not just the immediate situation, it is the dynamic through time, because the labor market effects of the crisis on women are likely to be persistent, simply because the evidence points to substantial gains, substantial returns to experience in the labor market. The persistence of output losses that I mentioned above is another major concern for Central Asia, as I said. Why is that? I would tell the story in very simple terms. This is the third major external shock to hit Central Asia in a little over a decade. Now, the 2008-9 crisis and the end of the commodity supercycle in 2014-15 were both followed by recoveries in the region. Growth picked up again. But in each case, trend growth was lower after the crisis than it had been before the crisis. Central Asia simply cannot afford another loss of momentum following this third major shock. If that pattern repeats itself, the trend towards convergence with the advanced economies in terms of per capita productivity and income, which has already stalled, will probably go into reverse. This is a critical moment. The reason for that persistence, of course, lies in the predominant growth models that have prevailed, relying on exports of labor, that is to say migrant remittances to sustain consumption, and exports of primary products. The crisis thus underlines Central Asia's principal long-term structural challenge, and that is to diversify production, employment, and exports to reduce this reliance on a limited range of hydrocarbons and other minerals. That links up to the work we've been doing on digitalization and connectivity, entrepreneurship, the legal environment for business. This is where the pieces come together, because the diversification agenda is going to require cross-cutting reforms in Central Asia, and in particular, it's going to require much more consistent implementation of measures that have been adopted to improve the investment environment, to improve the environment for entrepreneurship, to redefine the role of the state in the economy, and in particular to improve SOE governance, the governance of state-owned enterprises, to strengthen integrity and competition. Because ultimately, successful diversification has to come from the bottom up. It cannot be dictated from the top down. It has to come from allowing growth to occur and creating conditions in which foreign and domestic actors can undertake new activities. Now, this is a trade conference, so I want to say a word about trade and connectivity as I close. It's very important to understand that the trade and connectivity agenda, which is what I addressed the last time I spoke at a Central Asia Trade Forum, must go hand in hand with this diversification and competitiveness agenda. Opening up the region is going to create new competitive pressures, which means the conditions in which firms operate are going to be even more sensitive in terms of their prospects for survival. At the same time, diversification and greater competitiveness will require more opening, more trade, more connectivity, because these are relatively small economies. They're not going to achieve critical mass in an enormous range of different activities, and they don't need to. They need to achieve critical mass, finding successful niches and integrating successfully into particular markets in order to be able to export a wider range of goods and services, especially services exports, which are seriously underdeveloped. So precisely because these are relatively small economies, a domestically focused diversification strategy will always be self-limiting. Import substitution is not the solution. The solution is a very export-oriented strategy that is founded on better connectivity, more trade, but also critically on meeting the challenges that that connectivity and trade will create by ensuring better conditions for domestic entrepreneurs and for foreign investors alike. I thank you for your attention, and I wish everyone here an excellent forum. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person.
Спасибо большое, господин Томпсон. Мне кажется,
Thank you very much,
блестящее
Mr.
выступление.
Thompson. That's an excellent presentation where he touched on the most important issues. This forum will help our relatively small economies to unite, join, to reach success and well-being of the whole region. I would like to express my gratitude again. I really liked his presentation. Everything what he touched upon find response, and today and tomorrow all the themes which will be discussed by all our participants. And I think this virtual online forum, in spite of the fact that all of us are at different countries far from here, it united us due to this global pandemic which did happen. And now I will start after we proceed with the closure of the official opening ceremony, I would like to name all the partners and express our gratitude on behalf of organizers. European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, German Society of International Cooperation, American Trade Chamber in the Republic of Kazakhstan, CERT Academy, Royal Institute of Logistics and Transport, Global Alliance of the Cold Chain, Transport Union of Kaz Logistics, Trade Association of Tourism, Adventurous Tourism, UN World Tourist Organization, the project Women in Logistics and Transport. Also, we express our gratitude to all our media partners for organization of informational support of this event. Capital Newspaper, Discovery Kyrgyzstan Portal, Informational Platform IndiGuide, Kazakh Tourism, Information Agency Matrica KZ from Kazakhstan, Travel Tajikistan, Uzbekistan Travel Portal, and White Oyster Journal magazine. I would like to also attract your attention that you can learn about tourism and investment potential of Central Asian countries at the forum settradeforum.org. Our colleagues will put this link into the joint chat. Also, you can expand your business partnerships and get to know the participants of this forum at networking page of our forum. With that, we close our opening ceremony of 10th Central Asian Trade Forum. And after a short break at 15:30, Kazakhstani time, Nur-Sultan time, we invite you to participate in the first panel session, which is dedicated to the COVID impact of the regional chains of supply chains and strengthening of logistics transport chains of Central Asian countries. With that, I close the opening ceremony and I pass the word to the next moderator, Mr. Rahim Oshikbayev. He will meet you at the next session dedicated to transport and logistics. I would like to also highlight that we have social networks, Facebook page and forum site, and you can see all the changes which are happening there. Please do not leave us. It will be the same link. We will have a 10-minute break till 3:30 p.m. Nur-Sultan time. Thank you very much to all the presenters today. They were wonderful presentations. I would like to thank all the participants from different organizations, non-government organizations, business representatives, representatives of state agencies. I know that we'll have 5 fruitful days. And again, all these sessions, the records of all the sessions will be available by the end of the day if you missed any of the sessions. Thank you very much. Do not leave us.
extendtradeforum.org. Our colleagues will
Good afternoon. We can start.
Good afternoon, Rakim.
Hello. So good afternoon, dear participants of the 10th Central Asian Forum. My name is Rahim Moshakbayev. I'm director of the TALAP Center for Applied Research from Kazakhstan, Nur-Sultan. And today I'm happy to be a moderator of our session called The Impact of COVID-19 on Regional Supply Chains, Strengthening Transport and Logistic Networks in Central Asia. First of all, let me make some technical announcements. This event is being recorded. We have everybody muted by default, so we will not be disrupted. Simultaneous interpretation is available during the event. This function works if you are using the Zoom application. It doesn't work if you are accessing Zoom through your web browser. If you don't have the Zoom application, you may also view our event in English or Russian on our streaming YouTube channels. Our technical team will provide links to these channels in the Zoom chat box. This is a live tech support chat box on the forum's website. Attendees may also use the Zoom chat box throughout the event for any technical issues. And if you have a question for our panelists, please type it into the Q&A box. Depending on our time, we hope to get to some audience questions towards the end of our discussion. And before we introduce our panel, we have a special message from USAID's Acting Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Asia, Mr. Javier Piedra. Mr. Piedra oversees USAID's operations in 30 countries in Asia and has spent significant time living and working in Central Asia. Please, could you play the special message?
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists and participants, good afternoon. On behalf of the U.S. Agency for International Development, it is an honor to join you for the 10th Annual Central Asia Trade Forum. My name is Javier Piedra, and I am the Acting Assistant Administrator for the Bureau of Asia. I've had the privilege of participating in this forum 3 times now. in 2018 in Tashkent, in 2019 in Shymkent, and this year's virtual discussion. USAID is proud to continue supporting this event, and we remain committed to bolstering trade across the region, which includes, of course, Afghanistan, facilitating as well new commercial linkages and enhancing economic cooperation between Central Asia and the United States. The first session of this week's Trade Forum focuses on transportation and logistics and the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on cross-border trade, as well as its role ushering in new technologies, reshaping global supply chains, and paving the way for greater U.S. trade and investment in the region. USAID, in cooperation with American Chambers of Commerce and others, plays a vital role in leading regional development programs that focus on strengthening the private sector, increasing cross-border trade, and improving access to markets, even during the current challenges caused by the global pandemic. Through USAID's competitiveness, trade, and jobs activity, the United States supports a variety of initiatives to improve cross-border trade, foster economic growth, and increase the competitiveness of Central Asia's transport and logistics firms. Central Asia harbors massive potential for exporting fresh fruits and vegetables. However, without a properly functioning cold storage and transportation cold chain, these products degrade and can rot en route. And nobody wants that. USAID has partnered with the US-based Global Cold Chain Alliance to share America's best practices on cold chain logistics and build the knowledge and skills of local horticultural producers, traders, and transporters. Today, Uzbekistan has more than 2,000 cold storage facilities that account for nearly 4 million cubic meters of capacity. It now ranks among the global top 20 countries in global storage. That is an incredible achievement. USAID also works with horticultural producers and traders to identify which products might find their way to new markets. USAID has helped pilot trial air cargo shipments of strawberries and lemons grown with seeds imported from California, from Tajikistan to Kazakhstan. We have facilitated the transport of Turkmenistan's melons across 6 countries to be enjoyed in cities as far as Vienna. This expansion in new markets has opened up opportunities for Central Asian horticultural producers. Many of them are now exporting produce on their own accord without further assistance. USAID helps tear down barriers to trade markets by increasing access to information and putting small and medium-sized firms on equal footing with larger ones. Our export guide is helping to facilitate exports to foreign markets. We are helping producers pursue global gap certification, which could open the door to new and diverse global markets. Transportation and logistics are inherently complex fields. For the landlocked countries of Central Asia, cross-border and multinational cooperation is key. Over the past 5 years, USAID has supported the development of Central Asia's Transportation and Logistics Partnership. The TLP functions as a platform for public-private dialogue to reduce trade friction and improve the flow of goods. The TLP now has more than 120 member companies across 5 countries in Central Asia. Last year, by working together and across borders, the TLP assisted its members in facilitating over 70 million in transportation services contracts. USAID has been and will remain committed to advancing transport and logistics across Central Asia, creating new opportunities for the private sector to thrive, including American businesses. I look forward to hearing from all of you about what the future may hold in advancing Central Asia's ability to access a broad array of regional and international markets. Thank you all for your participation. I wish you a very productive 10th Annual Central Asia Trade Forum.
Newton, Secretary General of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, please. Mr. Cave.
Mr. Cave, please.
Apologies. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here as part of the Central Asian Trade Forum and to be part of this panel this morning. So welcome to all our attendees and to our other panel members. Just a quick introduction from me and about my organization. So I'm the Secretary General of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. We've been around for just over 100 years, founded in 1919. We've got 36 countries as part of our branch federation. We have had a particular focus over the last 3 years, really, in Central Asia. We founded CRT Kazakhstan back in 2017. And part of that 3 years particularly has been working with partners, especially USAID, in the region to build up our network of professional members and to build on our training and education capability, which is a principal focus of the organization. We are a professional membership body. I've been a member here in the UK for 37 years. And just a quick introduction on my background, which is primarily in the supply chain, working in food manufacturing and logistics for 30 years. In that role, and particularly in the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, I'm particularly passionate about sharing and networking across the world. And that's been made more important, I think, as we all recognize by this COVID crisis, but also the wider issues that the world faces in terms of climate change, trade barriers, and other issues like poverty, which are part result of some of the problems the world is facing today. So it's certainly central to our theme to have webinars like this, and I particularly am pleased to be with you today. Thank you, Rakim.
Thank you. Mr. Sean Cooley, Food Risk Offer Supply Chain Management Expert, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name's Sean Cooley. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport that Keith just mentioned. I'm also a visiting fellow at Cranfield University, where I specialize in discussing disruptive technologies in the supply chain. I'm an author of the book called Transition Point: From Steam to Singularity, which looks at the rise and fall of the technological driven progress and the impact that has on business, on the economy and society. And for a living, I'm a business transformation consultant and futurist. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lowell Randall, Senior Vice President of Government and Legal Affairs for the Global Cold Chain Alliance, please.
Hi, thank you very much. Again, Lowell Randall, Senior Vice President, Government and Legal Affairs for the Global Cold Chain Alliance. Really pleased to be participating in this session today. You heard the Assistant Administrator in his message reference the Global Cold Chain Alliance, and we're proud to be a part of several projects in the region trying to promote capacity development for the cold chain. We feel that the development of the cold chain globally is critical to improving trade, and with it, improving economic development, better nutrition, so we're committed to providing international capacity development in the region as well as globally. We've got members in over 80 different countries across the globe, where we support them through technical resources, capacity development, training, and really pleased to be a part of this session.
Thank you, Lowell. Vyacheslav Kim, owner of Trans-Asia Logistics Group of companies, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is also my pleasure being here. My name is Vyacheslav Kim. shortly Slava. I am owner and CEO of TransAsia Logistic Group. Yeah, we are doing logistics. This is logistics. This is our main business. So the export and import logistics within CIS is our #1 business. The second business is export and import logistics between Southeast Asia and CIS. And the third place, export and import between European Union and CIS. Last year, our company turnover is $50 million US, and we work in 8 countries having 10 offices, including all Central Asia countries, Russian Federation, Baltic states, and South Korea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Slava. Very impressive. And Marina Kuznichevskaya, Fly Dubai and chairperson, Will 8, Central Asia.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be a speaker at this forum. This is my second time to have this great experience. I'm a general manager of Fly Dubai airline for Kazakhstan and sometimes Central Asia. My overall experience in logistics is almost 20 years. I started as project manager at Schenker, and then I transferred to Jeffka. I was responsible for commercial activities in Central Asia. And for last 6 years, I used to work for Fly Dubai Airlines. We are second national carrier of Dubai, and we cover in more than 95 destinations all over the world. And I also chairperson of VLAT, Women in Logistics Organization, which belongs to CLT. I became a fellow, chartered fellow of CLT in 2017, and I became one of the first participants of this great organization. We are launching, as VLAT, we are launching Central Asia beginning of next year, and we hope that we will bring all female professionals together and we bring some opportunities for them to develop them all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marina. So let's start our discussion, and I think it certainly makes sense to start our discussion with the coronavirus because it's the biggest disruption we have ever seen, and it affects us all globally and regionally. And my first question to Keith and Lowell, what do you consider the big impacts to have been globally from COVID-19?
Shall I kick off, Lowell, and then pass to you? So thank you, Rakim. Yes, I think I'd like to sort of center this in the fact that it's actually that COVID-19 is certainly a big disruptor, but as we'll talk later, I think it's in many senses it's in a whole period of disruption that we've entered really over the last 10 years in many senses. And I know we're going to touch on particularly some of the trade impacts in later questions. But the world is quite a different place, and COVID has really come in and exacerbated that. And as we look forward, I think disruption is a theme that we'll pick up in this conference, and will be a theme that will impact us in different ways, even when we start to look post-COVID. And I know it's very difficult to look post-COVID at the moment, but certainly the immediate impacts of COVID have been are very much on the economic shutdowns across the world, the impacts on people's productivity as they have had to change working practices, in some cases stop manufacture, in many cases slow down some of the processes. And we're really only coming to terms with that. You've heard earlier William Tompkins from OECD give us some very sobering statistics around the Central Asia region. And the Central Asia region has been perhaps less impacted than Europe and North America particularly. So patterns have changed, responses have changed. And we, I think, coming through that that start of the, so the first 6 months has been very much around new disruptions appearing sort of almost every day. There's certainly in the UK, European environment, we're into a succession of lockdowns. As we look elsewhere, we're seeing places like Africa that are now coming out of those, and actually the economy is now responding again, and the impact has been less big. But certainly in terms of your answer to the question, we have still got a long way to go. And part of this forum is working out how we can respond in our businesses and how we can respond particularly in Central Asia. Lowell, do you want to add to that?
Yes, definitely. And I would absolutely agree with this theme of disruption. And disruption has been felt around the globe. There's no question. Whether it's in Central Asia, Western Europe, the United States, developing countries around the globe. And that has ranged from trade disruptions, which I know we're going to talk quite a bit about, to operational challenges. We've seen in our industry, this need for increased cleaning and the lack of cleaning supplies, personal protective equipment, this concept of social distancing that really was not on people's minds until the pandemic, and the changes to how we operate in food production facilities, the need to go contactless or paperless. And so there certainly is a lot of operational disruption and institutional disruption when you think about the pandemic impact on the food supply chain. But I also want to say another impact has been the increased recognition of how essential the food supply chain is. And I would add the cold chain in particular. As we think about, we normally are under the radar, so to speak. People across the globe, consumers, and even policymakers in many times don't think about the critical nature of the food supply chain. And this pandemic has elevated the needs of the supply chain and the importance that we play in making sure that the globe is fed, and not to mention the economic impacts. And so while there are certainly disruptions and challenges, I also want to highlight that there are opportunities. And I think if we can seize upon this increased profile of the food supply chain, we can all work together to better meet these disruptions and these challenges. And I think one other thing is this strain on infrastructure and the need for transportation and storage infrastructure. And again, this highlighted profile for the need of the food supply chain hopefully will result in governments and other investment in infrastructure, because I think that strain of the pandemic has really highlighted the need for not just more policies to support the food supply chain, but investments.
I think it's also worth to ask the same question to Sean as a futurist, because the case of the COVID and this disruption it created, I think it's absolutely amazing. And have you predicted this disruption? Was it your book, or you released it before this crisis, Corona crisis, or after?
The book was released before. I must admit I didn't predict the pandemic, but I did, however, predict that we were going to go through a period of great change over the coming decades, and at this point in time was a time where usually there's a lot of great danger in society. There are major power shifts, major paradigm shifts, major disruptions that ultimately and sometimes result in quite bad side effects, such as wars and revolutions, but ultimately end up in what I call a process of recalibration. And I think where we're seeing that now, we're seeing a lot of people like the World Economic Forum, for example, talk about the Great Reset, which is effectively, as I discuss in my book, this recalibration process of realizing that the business models and the way the world was structured before this moment in time, before this crisis, is not going to work post-crisis. One thing I did talk about in my book, and Keith mentioned this as well, which is, we are going through a period of great disruption that didn't really start with COVID. COVID is just part of, that process in so much as, it's a disruption in a longer time of disruption. And one of the things that I was very interested in writing my book was really understanding that. When I started work, certainly in the sort of late 1980s, 1990s, it wasn't as disruptive as this. You could pretty much predict that next year was going to be very similar to this year, which was also very similar to last year. But now that's not the case anymore. Now we're in a time where, we can't predict what's going to happen next month, let alone next year. And this process, and I did my research, is something called creative destruction. It's a term that was named by an Austrian economist called Joseph Schumpeter. And these times are a time of great danger, but as you rightly pointed out, they're also a time of great opportunity. We see an upspring of new technologies that will ultimately create a whole host of new industries. But these new industries will destroy the ones that are based around the old technologies. And the key, I think, for a lot of businesses and a lot of countries as well, is to make sure that you're on the creative side of that equation and not the destructive one. Now, the interesting thing is these wave cycles that we see, they last about 40 to 50 years. And the first 2/3 of the wave is innovative. So if I can put that in very simplistic terms, we have another decade of this disruption to come. And we're going to see a whole host of new technologies about to break cover and become mainstream. And I do talk about these at quite length in my book, Transition Point. So for a lot of people who think it's been disruptive so far, I've kind of got some bad news because the disruption hasn't really started yet. Most of these technologies are in the trough of disillusionment, as Gartner calls it, where we've seen the initial investments in them, but we haven't really seen the mainstream yet. And this goes from everything from autonomous vehicles to drones to AI systems. We've heard about them, we've seen trials, we haven't seen them go mainstream yet. But as I think Keith pointed out, COVID has provided the fuel for their development. I talk about this quite a lot, and I've written many articles about this. COVID has effectively become rocket fuel for their development, from everything through to, digital payment systems, through to, 5G technologies to enable, increased telepresence. There's a massive demand now for technologies due to COVID. And this gives most businesses an opportunity to completely rethink the why they do business, as well as the way they do business. And it enables them to think about how these new technologies can revitalize your business models. And that, I think, is really important for companies, is to really think about, what are their business models? What is that combination of, our defined customer segment, our unique value proposition, and then our, the way we deliver that, our operational execution of that? And how can these new technologies help to transform all of those? How can they help to, enable your customer to achieve their goals? And I think the key for organizations in this time is to really focus on solving your customers' problems and not to focus on trying to sell your products, because products and services can become obsolete very quickly during these times, but customer needs really do. And if you can define what your why is, then the what and how of technology suddenly makes a lot more sense. And what we're seeing is a lot of companies waste a lot of money on digital technologies because they haven't got the why right. They're looking at the what's and how's and technologies and making big investments in it, but then don't know what to do with it when they have it. And I think it's important as well for companies to realize that it is a very complex and complicated time right now, but there is a difference between complex and complicated. It might be complex in terms of the technologies, but actually what you should be looking at as an organization, and the opportunity for most companies is this, is how do we remove the complicated? How do we make things simpler? How do we remove barriers to value and simplify the customer experience and not to complicate it? And finally, I think there's great opportunity for developing nations, to be able to look at these technologies and say, can we use these to to leapfrog more mature economies that maybe are tied down by their attachments to old infrastructures and old technologies and old ways of working, and be able to use these to completely, revitalize their economies and their businesses, and actually to see them as a way to, as I say, as to leapfrog companies and countries that are potentially stuck in their ways. So yes, you're right. There's a time of great opportunity as well as great threat, and people should really look for those opportunities where they can.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for advices to the region. And that's, I think it's time to land our discussion a bit into the region. That's why my question to Marina and Vyacheslav. Talking about the trade and business across Central Asia, what is on your view, the biggest disruptive factors, and what is the biggest challenges? Is it COVID, or is it politics, or is it the global technological shifts? Marina, please.
I would say it's a complex. So COVID disrupted almost each industry. It's not disrupt, but it's touched it in a negative way. So for example, aviation, it was a visible damage. For generation, we used to see airplanes crossing the sky in any region, doesn't matter at which part of the planet you live. So here in Kazakhstan, for example, in Central Asia, most of airports were closed. So most of the logistic chains were broken. So nowadays we are working on restructuration of this, and also on bringing some new opportunities and some new technologies. So I think the biggest failure was uncertainty. Each day something was changed, legislation was changed, a lot of restrictions was coming from nowhere. So each business was trying to adjust the economy, the processes, the business strategy to new changes, but unfortunately it wasn't not so easy. So now we need to create some short strategies, so to use short strategic planning, maybe for months, for 3 months, and be ready to live in such world, which is new for us. This is our new normal. And government need to support us, and doesn't matter how hard it may be financially and for the budget. So we just need to adjust and try to use all the opportunities we see. So there are new markets, new business models, new potential clients and new suppliers all over the world. So now this is the time when we become like a one big unit, and we need to look forward to connect to each other and to find like common solutions.
So policy consistency, is it an issue for all countries of the region?
I think yes, because our governments weren't ready for such situation. Even we had like a plan A, plan B, it didn't work very well. So governments and policy are also adjusting. For example, at the Chinese border, there is a shortage of containers. For aviation sector, there is a lot of restrictions due to COVID-19. So airlines and logistic companies are not sure what's going up next. So we're just trying to be proactive and be ready for the new legislation, which is not always friendly for the local businesses and for regional businesses.
Okay, Marina. Thank you, Vyacheslav. What is your version about the biggest disrupting factors and challenges for trade and international business?
Of course, this year, COVID-19 is the main factor. We lost 20% of our turnover this year. And at the same time, we had to work harder and more this year, even though we lost almost half of turnover. At the same time, this year, political issues also impact to logistic business. American and Chinese trade war, some president elections in Kyrgyzstan, and other political issues happened this year too. Frankly speaking, about Uzbekistan, last 3 years we have a new president, and he started some reforms in Uzbekistan. That's why I think that Uzbekistan has less damage of COVID-19 because of reforms started 3 years ago. Same with logistic business in Uzbekistan because reforms take place in taxes, in customs regulations, in all paperwork with government. So even though we starve very much, but we still see positive moments in this situation.
Thank you, Vyacheslav. And based on your optimism, may I ask you what are your expectations for recovery of business activity in your industry for the next year, for the next couple of years?
Some people think that this situation as a, how to say, forest fire for logistic companies, but we think in our company that it is more like natural selection. So in our business in logistics, weak companies who is not going to make changes inside will go out of the market, and middle companies will take the whole place, the whole market within. So the positive thing is that someday this pandemic will stop and we will see deferred demand for many goods. And we hope that at that time, maybe middle of 2021 or the end of 2021, we will have much more job than this year.
And what will be the losses? How many % of companies in the region may not survive during the crisis?
Depends on the country, depends on the market. I think in Kazakhstan, which is more economically developed, less companies will die, maybe 10 to 15%. But for Uzbekistan, which just started the business in a new way for the last 3 years, we think that 20–25% of the companies will die.
Mm-hmm. I suppose it's inevitable, but hope we see the forces of the creative destruction Sean mentioned.
So we think that April, May next year, the peak of bankrupts we can see.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next question, let me address to Lowell and Vyacheslav. What does this mean for Central Asian countries or industry sectors trying to survive and importantly grow?
Yes, so I do think that there are opportunities, and in one of the things I believe we're all fortunate to be involved in the food industry. We are essential, and the demand is always going to be there to feed the globe. And so I think we can start from that position to say, while there is disruption, there is an opportunity for operators in the region and really globally, because we are fortunate to be in the food industry. But there has been this disruption and some shifting. And one of these areas is from food service, restaurants, institutional food offerings to retail and grocery. And I think that shows one of the areas where we need to be thinking about diversification. So I know that many of our members who were dedicated to food service work really struggled in this situation. And so they are looking at how do they diversify their customer base. How do we look for new value-added services? And it was alluded to what technologies might be available to assist. So I think creativity and flexibility are going to be very important. We can't always depend upon one static customer, and that's both applies to both a domestic and a trade-based perspective. We recently did a survey of our members related to the pandemic, and 74% of our members said that they see increased opportunity for international trade post-pandemic. And so I think there is optimism. I think, and we also see that 48% of our members anticipate that the cold chain industry will grow as a result of some of the pandemic opportunities. Now, certainly there'll be some contraction in some firms that are lost in the food supply chain, but I think our members are optimistic. When we think about wet markets, they are the subject of a lot of scrutiny right now, and we believe that that may lead to a better recognition from policymakers and others in the industry that we need more cold chain capacity, both in cold storage and then also refrigerated and frozen transportation. So again, these infrastructure investments are going to be key, as well as modernizing how we do business through things like simplifying and standardizing customs policies, trade digitalization, utilization of technologies. I think all of those are factors that can help the region to make it out of the pandemic successfully.
Okay. Vyacheslav, you as a person from the region, what it takes to survive and grow?
I don't know how many time it takes to survive and grow, but we think that we are not thinking about surviving, because this year, as we had more than 2 months of full lockdown. So you can see me, we already survived and we are okay. But we think more about how to grow post-pandemic times. So we think 2 things we should do: increase efficiency and make more diversity in our business. So we look more for e-commerce, we look more for domestic transportations and custom clearance services, because you know that the area of European Union and the area of Central Asia is almost equal. And everybody knows that how many thousands transportations makes in European Union every day, and at least maybe 500 to 600 transportations per day we can see within the Central Asia. Of course, we also trying to increase our management skills, because for post-pandemic, the basic logistics skills is not going to be change a lot, but management and controlling is very important now to be more successful post-pandemic times.
Vyacheslav, do you use any government support in this crisis to feel so good?
You know, in our Russian offices, they give us some money for our stuff. In Uzbekistan, they canceled some taxes, which is maybe 0.1 something of our turnover. So we don't have much support from the governments as a private company. Yeah, we don't have much support.
Mm-hmm. Marina, and what is your experience and the experience of your partners in the region? Because you talked about inconsistency, but as we see in many developed countries, so the state support is extremely crucial, extremely important.
State support is extremely important for us locally. We don't see much only government companies get something from the state. For example, airports, some local companies can get something, but it's mostly loans, which you need to give back with some percentage, which is really not helpful. But positive impact, because of this unsupportive environment, we became more flexible, more open. So we're trying to create some alliances. So little companies are trying to get bigger together in a way to survive. So now they're sharing information and they're trying to divide it. For example, services, someone is very strong in custom clearance, as Vyacheslav mentioned, someone has warehouse. So now they're trying to create like a little holding or union. Most of the countries in Central Asia were historically isolated. For example, Kyrgyzstan, they was kind of affected most because of the revolution, because of COVID, because of lockdown. But now companies are trying to go outside, to be visible at the outside markets, to be attractive to the partners. Same with Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. We cannot survive inside the country. We need to communicate and we need to find like common solution. So each government has their own policy as they're trying to protect and to support just some very key businesses. Logistic and aviation is a major part of GDP for some countries because we have very strong and important geopolitical situations. But for the first 2 months of lockdown, I think logistic was just struggling. Each company was trying to survive, to find solution, not to lose the contracts, not to lose the connection with their international partners. So now this is the time for the opportunities. So logistic chains are remoderating now. So there is a new Lego structure. So we're trying to find our space somewhere in a big machine and big equipment. So only together we can be strong and we can move. Otherwise, we're gonna be not die, but it will be the time of survival. Now is the time to be stronger and to be effective.
Thank you, Marina. So the question to Sean and Keith, trying to lend your broad international expertise and vision to the regional specificity, what kind of advices you can give to the local companies to be more resilient and prepared for the next disruptive crisis?
Keith, shall I start?
Yeah, you start, Sean.
Okay. I think, as we discussed earlier, that this time of change and disruption is not going to end. So it's very important companies start to model the business for the present and for the future, and really not for the past. And that's one of the biggest challenges I see across the world. Really, was most leaders were trained in the downswing. Now I mentioned that we have these sort of waves of change, and we're very much in the upswing right now, where it's very disruptive. But actually, most people who led organizations, and actually most of our political leaders and leaders of our governments, were trained in time when change was relatively linear. They were trained in organizations, for example, to manage expectations and to reduce costs and to lean the supply chain and to offshore the supply chain. Whereas now we're in this upswing period and things are going to be disruptive for a long while. We know certain things to be true. We know that e-commerce is going to continue to grow, for example. We know that customer expectations are going to become more demanded. We know that controlling last mile delivery costs is going to become ever more critical. So the challenge really is for organizations to become bimodal. They need to, control the business right now, but also change the business. And most organizations are really struggling with that. They're used to being able to control things, to be reliable, to be cost conscious, but they're not used to being entrepreneurial and experimental. But this is a big challenge, I think, because before you can start to use new hardware and new software, you've really got to develop new thoughtware. These machines need new mindsets. So it's imperative really that the organization starts to develop new skills in its leadership and also empower its people beneath them to become more engaged, to become more creative, and to become more entrepreneurial in their thinking. They've really got to start to think long term, and they've really got to start to think strategically, not just tactically. There is a tendency in a period of disruption to sort of tighten the reins and to focus on the short term and to focus on tactics, but they've really got to start to think about, where are we going as an organization? What are our business models, and how can we strategically use these new technologies, not only to survive today, but to thrive moving forwards? There are other things we know that are going to happen as well. We know that there's a major global push to become carbon neutral and to reduce dependency on human labor to do things and on fossil fuels. We know the Great Reset initiative that the World Economic Forum has undertaken is going to go ahead. We know there are going to be things like, green initiatives and those sorts of things. So, it's about how do we, move forwards knowing those things that we know and trying to minimize the things that we don't know. We also know that things like AI-based scheduling and planning is going to become more commonplace to accommodate the complexity of a supply chain that effectively captures data every step of the way and updates and adjusts in real time. And we're seeing companies like Unilever and Johnson & Johnson and some of the leading logistics companies, really start to invest on that. And one of the things that's really interesting is how some of the paradigms that we used to believe to be true have now changed. So a good example of this is Mark Engel, who's the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Unilever. One of the things that he said very recently is that they found out that agility is more important than forecasting. And they've spent a lot of money sort of simplifying their offering. I think they took about 65% of their products out of their product chain to reduce the long tail. And they've really focused on ensuring that they have capacity throughout the supply chain in order to adapt in this really disruptive time. So agility, rather than just sort of cost control, has become absolutely key to survive in these, really uncertain times. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of companies now need to really, really understand and to really focus on.
Thank you, Sean. Dave, please.
Yeah, certainly. No, I think those bigger themes I think are very important to stay in mind in terms of building on what Marina and Václav were saying about locally. Wherever you are in the world, there's some sectors you're in that transport and logistics companies just their business has gone, and so we're not really talking about those here. I live very close to what's called the Golden Triangle, which is the major sort of warehousing distribution area in the UK. And I know a big warehouse here where the business is focused on event management, like concerts and moving equipment around. And of course, all of that market's disappeared and they're closing their warehouse. Next door, there's a big third-party logistics business that's very much focused on health and personal protective equipment, and they need much more space. So they're buying the warehouse that is closed next door. So some businesses won't survive, but I think the important thing that we've been stressing here is those that will, and those that, as Václav have said, have already survived. It's not about survival. It's not necessarily about government grants. I think there's a real weakness in some of the Western economies which have encouraged people to not sort the issues, but actually wait for government to bail them out. And I think the focus, so very practically, the focus for transport and logistics businesses short term is to recognise, as Sean has been saying there, that this change is a factor of things to come. And therefore, what you need to have is you need to be looking at your opportunities, looking at how that can play through, being very close to customers and suppliers. So supply is now much more vulnerable than we thought it was. Our customers change much more quickly from a physical supply environment to an e-learning environment, from retail to picking up home deliveries. So all of those things are changing very dramatically, and we need to be very close to our customers in that. Risk management is the big theme. I think if you talk to a lot of transport and logistics businesses, they wouldn't have had a risk management process in the past. And if they did, I'm certain probably less than 1% predicted COVID and had any sort of provision for that. So if you haven't got a risk management process, you need to have one. And Lovell was talking about the global food system. That's probably the next crisis that will come up. So huge population, huge dependency on certain areas. Certainly in the United States, a lot of the supply in terms of food is coming from there and other parts of the world. What happens if climate change provides some disruption into that in 3 years' time? The McKinsey global studies say that we can reckon having a risk, a major world risk to supply every 3.7 years. So what is the next risk and what are we doing about it as businesses, just at a local level in terms of how we manage some of those risks? And then I think just to finish those practical points, I think it is about being professionals and thinking internationally. So this type of event we're running here today, I think has been encouraged by the COVID crisis, and we need to continue. So there are solutions, those solutions are out there, it's interesting, and it's also critical and informative that we understand how people are adapting to these different issues in different sectors, whether it's aviation or whether it's the supply chain, and how we're doing that globally, and retaining as professionals that international world look at this, because the solutions are out there. So, Rakeem, that's my take on the question.
Thank you, Keith. I like your point about the risk management. It's really very important, but it's quite hard to manage the risks when there are so many black swans coming and coming. So, and it's not the end of the 2020 yet. So let's talk about the ideology of protectionism, which becomes more and more kind of the fashion in the region, in the Eurasian Economic Union, and we see this ideology quite, let me say, more or less successfully implemented in Russia. And some countries of our region also would like to copy it or to use the ideology of protectionism. And the question is to Marina and Lowell, how might this protectionism impact Central Asia, which is quite geographically insulated from much of the world, and how has this impact, for example, aviation and agriculture sectors?
I think that lockdown during COVID-19 was like a great show for the governments to see that protectionism is not working very well, because all the countries in Central Asia were isolated for 2 months. So all the working structures were broken. So country could, enjoy their own local businesses inside, which is really not successful. So I think for the government, this is the time when they need to be flexible, when they need to be more open for the new environment. And they need to understand that the previous strategy wasn't so functional or wasn't functional enough. So let's look at Belarus. It's a different region, but this is the result of like a hard, strict protectionism. So now in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, this is the time to be open, to be economically proactive, and to look forward to the changes. As we see with aviation as example, for 2 months, it was totally 0 flights. Nowadays, we have only 10-15% of airlines which go back to the business. And this is not enough for supply chain for the passengers. So we need to try to find new solutions. And new solutions are coming from the new management, from the new risk management, from the new skills, from the exchange of experience from all over the world. I think we just need to be open and proactive. This is the way to survive and to be effective. For now, effectiveness is the way to, it's like a new vaccine for the economies.
Thank you, Marina. But nevertheless, I think most of the government will see some sense in creating self-sufficiency in some critical goods, and they can use the instruments of the protectionism, for example, self-sufficiency in producing masks or producing gloves.
Yes, this is anti-monopoly committees need to work very strongly because they're trying to protect their own market, but the own market is not very competitive. So increasing of price is not the good solution. The solution only for the few persons who own this business, but for the citizens, for the businesses, this is just a new way to suicide, I think. And this is like a very short-term strategy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lowell, please.
Yes, so I think early on in the pandemic, unfortunately, one of the natural reactions is, okay, we need to protect our citizenry and look inward. And that is, while it's a natural reaction, it also is, I believe, short-sighted. And I'm hopeful, and I believe that most of the countries in the region that implemented export restrictions and really curtailed the movement of food across borders, that most of those restrictive policies have been lifted, but they do have a negative impact. And while I think there were concerns about being able to feed a domestic population given the uncertainties of the pandemic. And so it's understandable that policymakers would have these concerns, but I'm hopeful that now that we've been through this cycle of the pandemic and we've seen that food production can continue, that the food supply chain is strong and resilient, there's not a need to protect that domestic production and forego the need for that cooperation and international trade. And I think we're headed globally. I see we're headed back in a positive direction there, and I'm hopeful for the region as well. When you stop exporting, that has multiple impacts. So not only are you having a short-term economic impact, but your international trade customers are going to look to find those products elsewhere if you're not able to export to them. And sometimes those markets don't fully recover to the same level before those export restrictions were put into place. So I think we should be looking at ways to increase regional cooperation and collaboration. As we look at trade agreements, as we look at other mechanisms for international cooperation, we can learn from the early missteps in the pandemic and say, we know that we need to look outside our borders to promote international trade and not be protectionist because it has negative economic impacts and that could be more lasting. So again, I think regional collaboration is key, and multilateral agreements can be useful to protect against some of those anti-trade policies moving forward.
Thank you. I think it's obvious that the universal message from the pandemic is that the business has had to transform to survive. We're talking about the new ways of working, about new technologies, artificial intelligence and automation. But in the region Central Asia, we also face lots of obstacles like the access to finance, access to capital, access to the skilled labor. So Marina, I think it's very important, talked about inconsistency in policy. And nevertheless, Sean, the question is to you and then to all the panelists. From your perspective, I like that you mentioned the creative destruction from Joseph Alois Schumpeter. And we see this destruction globally, but in the region of Central Asia, this creative destruction, how do you see it will come, and how to adapt to these changes? And because again, when we are talking about the big things, big technological shifts, but in the region, so we have quite simple and obvious challenges.
The process of creative destruction, unfortunately, is unstoppable. It's going to happen. It's going to affect different regions in somewhat different ways. But this is a unique time in history because due to globalization and due to the sort of digital nature of these technologies, they are impacting different geographies all at the same time and in ways that they didn't expect. So previously, for example, we go back to, say, the earlier industrial revolutions. It would take many years, decades, and you know, in some cases, almost centuries for sort of, you know, some of the technologies that developed maybe in the, say, first industrial revolution to make their way across the world. And there were chances to adapt, and there were chances to see this coming and make, you know, adaptations to this new wave. But what's happening right now is that technology is moving digitally. It's moving across, you know, increasingly faster. You know, technologies that enable things that happen in one continent to appear in another continent instantaneously. And it is going to cause, unfortunately, an impact around the world. And, you know, the way I advise companies to adapt to that is that you really, you know, they really need to have a Copernican business revolution. So, you know, we used to believe that the Earth was the center of the universe and that everything circled around the Earth. And until, you know, we had a sort of heliocentric model was created by Copernicus, where we said, no, actually, you know, the sun is at the center of the universe and the planets and everything circled that. And we need to have that kind of mindset and paradigm shift in our businesses. You know, we've been talking about becoming customer centric for years, and now we really kind of need to actually do this. And what's coming down the road, the process of creative destruction is bringing something that I've called the triple whammy of creative destruction, which is whammy number one is effectively we're going to see a vast number of machines that will replace the things that human hands used to do, from picking things out of the ground and all the agricultural industries there, through to mining, through to driving, through to putting things on shelves. Anything that, you know, human muscle used to do is effectively going to be replaced. The second whammy is the one that I think that has a lot of people spooked, because you used to believe that if your collar was white, like mine, that you had an office job or knowledge-based work, that you were safe. That the technology didn't really affect you. It was only a boom for your type of job. That, you know, it would automate some of your roles, but the sort of meaningless tasks, such as, you know, word processors, these sorts of things. But ultimately, your job was safe. And that's not true anymore. So whammy number two, the sort of replacement of minds with machines through the development of things like artificial intelligence, has a lot of people in the knowledge economy really spooked. And whammy number three is that, you know, machines that converse and collaborate with other machines. So what we're increasingly going to see is sort of effectively a cloud-based hive mind of where, you know, artificial intelligence, you know, planning and replenishment systems will connect via things like the blockchain in order to, you know, control all of these different levels of technology around the world. And that, unfortunately, is going to impact the emerging nations as much as the developed nations, because, you know, a lot of the emerging nations used to trade off, you know, low labor costs, for example, but they're going to really struggle to compete against machines that ultimately, you know, will operate for the cost of electricity. And what we're about to see is that a number of these technologies that have been bubbling under for a while are about to, what they call, cross the chasm and become mainstream. So we've been talking about blockchain for a while, but we haven't really seen it. We've been talking about drones for a while, but, you know, again, we've not seen much of those. We've been talking about collaborative robots, about cognitive computing. We've been talking about quantum computing. We haven't really seen much of that yet, but we're about to. And it's all going to come into the mainstream really, really quickly. And we're also seeing things that are being pushed by government policy. So, for example, you know, both hybrid and fully electric vehicles are now at the tipping point. Again, we've been talking about them for about a decade, but now we're seeing, you know, a massive push to sort of phase out the internal combustion engine vehicles, and that's going to impact any of the countries that sign up to things like the Great Reset that's going to take place, or any of these sort of Green New Deals. And what we're going to end up with is a supply chain that I call the PAL supply chain, where we're moving away from mass production and mass marketing into much more personalized and customizable products. We're going to have an automated end-to-end supply chain, but also one that's much more local. So rather than shipping things halfway around the world, other than those things, of course, that we need to because they only exist in certain parts, we're going to have a much more sustainable, much more circular, much more local supply chain where we only make what you need. We make it locally. We make it using more reusable materials. We store it locally. We move it using electric automated vehicles. And we see these technologies come together into things like these sort of modular manufacturing, factory in a box concepts, where the combination of 5G and 3D printing and collaborative robots allows for modular manufacturing on the move to move it to wherever the need is. So rather than being sort of big central locations, you would be able to see the ability to take these technologies and lift it and shift it to wherever there's a need. Because as 5G gets rolled out, it will enable a work from anywhere culture to develop for the workers, but also a manufacture from anywhere concept to arise as well. We're going to see the rise of the Internet of Things, which is going to capture data everywhere, and we won't be able to use humans to make sense of that data because there'll just be too much of it. So we're going to be looking at using, advanced AI analytics and, cognitive computing in order to make sense of all of these different data sources. And then already certain companies have been moving towards what they've been calling the self-aware supply chain, where effectively they've realized that, the biggest bottleneck in most of the elements of their supply chain are the humans who interfere. And actually now we have technologies that are able to take all of this information, unstructured information as well as structured information, put it together and to see trends that humans simply can't see. And I think the other thing that's going to be really transformative is quantum computing. A year ago, Google reached quantum supremacy with their Sycamore computing systems, where it took 4 minutes to do what a traditional supercomputer would take 10,000 years to do. There are a number of different needs for that type of computing power, one of which is obviously finding new pharmaceutical solutions, things like vaccines that we're talking about now. But also as we connect together all of these different technologies, autonomous vehicles, drones, elements in the blockchain, all that sort of stuff, to be able to process that and make decisions in sort of the nanoseconds we're going to need to, this is where things like quantum computing is going to come up. So you've got a whole raft of technologies that have been in development for well over a decade now that are about to burst onto the scenes. And it's going to have an impact, not just in the West, but across the world. And I think it's imperative that, wherever you sit right now, whether or not you're in Kazakhstan or whether or not you're in Kensington in London, you need to understand that these technologies are coming and they will have an impact. So it's really imperative that you understand how they're going to affect your business and how you can leverage the opportunity to be on the creative side of creative destruction.
Thank you, Sean. Let me address the same question to all panelists, starting from Slava. What is your version of the biggest changes coming in the near future? Vyacheslav, please. You muted.
Yeah. So the biggest changes
coming in the industry, in the region, in the near future, we should be prepared.
I think we should be prepared to, as I said before, to the deferred demand in logistics, in tourism, because so many people wanted to go somewhere this year and they just postponed to next year or maybe in a year. So same in trade, because frankly speaking, the quantity of people in our republic, in Central Asia republics, especially in Uzbekistan, is growing. Yeah, this year plus 500,000 people in Uzbekistan. So, yeah, we should be ready. We should be prepared for deferred demand. That's why in all businesses, we should become more efficient.
Okay, thank you.
In my company this year, we just lost some volumes and so we have more free time. and we spent it to get some education, read some books, which we had no time to read last year, the year before. And of course, we reconstructed this year our company. I hope to finish these reconstructions by the end of first quarter 2021.
Thank you, Slava. Marina?
I will agree with Vyacheslav. As a representative of airline industry, I would say we didn't predict any growth during the lockdown. We didn't know what to expect. And when we started, we understood that our greatest expectation about the growing demand are just way above. So each airline which represented at Central Asian market, they sold their tickets like a month ahead during a few hours. No one expected. We all thought that people will be afraid to travel for their own safety. But as we see people just starving for the life, they just want to feel alive themselves. And next year, when the vaccine will be at the market, we think that situation will change. It will be positive changes. So people will try to bring into life their postponed wishes and desires. This is the same for logistics, for transportation, for some productions company. Everything which was postponed for the period of COVID-19 pandemic, it will be growing, it will be blooming. We don't know when, maybe next year, maybe in 2 years, but we gonna create some new economy theory, or I would say explosion. It will be like an explosion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So quite optimistic.
We hope so.
Kate, yeah. Cave, please. What do you see the biggest changes?
I have no other choice. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Rakim. Well, I think Sean's articulated them very well in terms of there is major disruption on the horizon, and that takes form in the areas he's been talking about. I think practically for businesses, what I would encourage you to do is look at that, so be aware of that, but look at it not as necessarily as a threat, but as a friend. So what are businesses doing currently? The successful businesses are adapting, and as Sean mentioned earlier, they're agile. So technology, there are technologies out there, blockchain being one of them, an example of just the electronic transfer of data. People who are adapting to that and using some of that technology are overcoming not only COVID and disruption at ports and productivity impacts, but they're at borders, but they're also overcoming more successfully some of the trade barriers that we spoke about earlier. And I think so one is be adaptive, be agile. The second is also get skills and knowledge on board in your business. Transport and logistics companies are notorious really for being at the back end of any technological change. And I've worked in them, and what we need to recognize is that we need younger people who understand these things, and we need skilled people, whether that's skilled people who know how to get goods through customs and trade barriers, or people who know how to apply the technology. We need to bring some of those skills into our businesses.
Thank you, Keith. Lowell, please.
Well, being the last of the panel to answer this question, so many good points have already been raised, so I might just summarize a few of the key things from my perspective. I absolutely agree that adaptability, flexibility are key in this situation with all of the disruption and uncertainty. I know within our industry, the most successful companies have been the ones who've been able to adapt very quickly, shift from one customer base to another, identify new ways of doing business, new value-added services. Communication is so critical in this time. And so making sure that you are communicating with your customers And that can be difficult because we don't do as much in person. So technology absolutely plays a key role. We're all able to have this meeting virtually, and I think we're seeing those companies in the global food supply chain utilize this technology, which is really very affordable, to conduct business, to do trainings, to do sales. And I think there are both low-tech, low-cost technologies like this that we're going to see more adoption of, particularly as we see the workforce transition. I know that many of our members are looking at having some more of their workers work remotely and not come into the office. Now that doesn't work on a production line and it doesn't work on a warehouse floor, but there are a lot of functions where you don't have to be there physically. So the use of technology there, and that's going to take some flexibility and open-mindedness from business leaders to say, yes, we can utilize this technology. And then when we think about not just information technology, but also automation, that is a high priority for our industry. Europe really has led the way when it comes to warehouse automation. We're seeing more and more of that adopted in North America, Australia. I think it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, though. So we may see incremental adoption of automation in developing countries and in Central Asia as people look at what makes sense for their particular business operations. But certainly technology, adaptability, and diversification, I think, are three keys.
Thank you. And one question to Marina and Vyacheslav. I think one of the most important factor of the competitiveness of the business, of any business, it's people. And what do you see, what is the situation in the region of Central Asia about education, training, and skill capacity? What have changed already and what have to change? Marina, please.
For the first, I think, few weeks of lockdown, people were stressed, they were in pain, but then they understood that they need to create something new, to bring some new value to the company they're still working, or to bring to them some new skills to be able to move from the companies which are closed during the crisis and to move on. So I think the new trainings and new experience is most important now. In a way to survive, people need to modify themselves, to be open to the new knowledge, to be ready to move from one industry to another one, because most of the industries, for example, like aviation, we had like a huge cut, maybe 40% of employees were fired or they are on paid leaves. Same with airports, same with warehouses all over the world. So people need to adjust, and not to negatively adjust just to sit and wait, just looking for the new options for them to be successful, to be able to support their families, to be able to feel themselves proud for who they are. So for us, as for CLT, for other organizations, this is the most important time to share their knowledge, to show to the people that they have a chance to still be valued as the experts in a field they're working for years. And as experts, they can share their own unique experience with others who needs to be kind of cheered up. So I think for the next 2-3 years, trainings and any like marathons, which are very popular in our region, are gonna be like a leading part of any industries. Doesn't matter where you are now.
Thank you, Marina. Slava, your microphone is muted.
For me, education and training do not became much more, do not have much more quality, do not became with much more quality this year. But for me, it became more easier to study, because even without pandemic times, I don't have much time to travel and study. But this year, many courses and educations became online. So it is very comfortable now, because as I said, even without pandemic, I didn't have much time to travel to study. And this year I get almost every day some invitations from European, Russian, and Kazakhstan courses, inviting me to join the study. And I always ask them, why didn't you send this online invitation before? Last year you asked to come and show the passport. So now it became much easier for me. And as I said, this year I made a lot of education, and it's very good. It's very good, and it supports us a lot.
Thank you, Slava. So let us switch to the questions from the Q&A box. 3 points have been made on the subject of trade and borders. And the first question is, reflecting on what has happened elsewhere in the world, how important is to keep borders open? Who would like to take this question?
Rakim, I can just answer from a Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport viewpoint that, and it's back to the point that we're a professional body, not a political body, but we do have influence on governments in terms of policy. I think the trend has been last year there were 114 new restrictive trade agreements that were put through internationally. So it has been going the wrong way. There are some slight changes in that. A lot of that is political, we know, but as professionals, it's very important for us to seek to influence policy in government, and we seek to do that as an institute body, so that politicians understand the importance of keeping those borders open, particularly. And I think COVID has driven that, will drive more change in that as we go forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. The next question, how has the pandemic affected logistics costs because of the health and sanitation measures?
Rakim, this is Lowell. I actually can start on this if you don't mind. We have some data on this very question. Our industry, we did a pandemic impacts survey. One of the questions that we asked was the impact of cost of doing business related to extra cleaning, sanitizing, social distancing, other kinds of pandemic-related expenses. And we found that over 80% of respondents to the survey told us that there was an increase in cost. About 38% of respondents said that it was roughly 5% increase in expenses over what they had normally planned for. 26% said it was somewhere between 6 and 10% increase. And then 17% of respondents said that it was greater than 10% increase in costs. So that is some data that we've received in for the increased cost of doing business related to pandemic expenses.
Thank you. And the third question is, I suppose, to Slava and Marina. with the digitalization pilots starting this week between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, what's the opportunity here to solve borders challenges? Slava, please.
Could you repeat, please, Rahim?
So with the digitalization pilots starting this week between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, what's the opportunity here to solve borders challenges?
I don't see much opportunities because they just started. So we need some time to see how the system works. And maybe next year we can see some outcomes, some results.
Okay. Marina, please.
This is a new system and we just need to see how it will work. And nowadays there are too many changes. Each day something new is coming to the market. So we just need to wait and see the results, the first results and the second results. For nowadays, it's not so easy to predict something. So we can understand the model that it's supposed to have some positive impact, but I think it's too early to comment anything. Okay. We need time.
Thank you, Marina. And the last question is about tourism and advertising. So what is the impact on tourism and advertising in the region?
Like for international tourism, it affects dramatically. For, I think, 5 months, there was no movements anywhere. But local tourism in any country was booming. We investigate our own countries. And it was new for us. For example, people who was born in a country, but we never traveled inside and we didn't see the beauty. But now when the borders are slightly opened and we can fly somewhere outside Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, people are trying to find the way to their previous life, to post-COVID. I think travel, this is a sign that they still can be normal, that they still have this possibility to travel their families and kids somewhere to show them something new. Because my generation, we were born in USSR, so we never dreamed about some international travel. So we thought that all we can have is that just books and these TV shows about Africa, Gulf countries, Europe, and anything. So this is, we created our cultural background from the theory, not from the real life. So our kids, our grandkids are luckier than us. And I think during this lockdown, we felt the greatest fear that we kind of thrown back to the past and we're unable to change anything. Because as human beings, we have a hope. We're always hoping for something better. But when 1 month passed, nothing changed. And second month passed, nothing changes. And just some worst cases are coming up. So we feel fear. So travels for us is like a relief. So travel shows that we're financially stable. We still can communicate. As a tourist, maybe someday as a business people, we still can meet in person. Zoom is a great idea, but still we need to see people in person to feel them. We are social animals, as people say. So tourism Absolutely. Is our new like priority. I wouldn't say priority, but this is our normal part of our normal life and we want it back. And I hope that now everything is slowing back to normal, step by step, with some kind of step backs due to some new lockdowns, new COVID restrictions. But we hope that vaccine will be at the market, as I heard, in November. So maybe next year, next summer, we will be normal again. We hope so.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And being so optimistic, let me finalize our session. Let me thanks to all panelists, to all participants who watched our live discussion. And definitely, I think that we are passing through this crisis, Corona crisis, and the biggest uncertainties in the world politics, like who will be the next president in the United States and what is the ruling party will be in Kazakhstan. So we will pass within a couple of months in January. And I'm also quite optimistic about 2021, and absolutely agree with Marina that this hunger for social life, this hunger to see each other, this hunger to travel and to see the world, so will also create lots of opportunities, business opportunities for trade and logistics. So thank you very much. Let us finish this live discussion. And also I'd like to announce that the next session on tourism is taking place tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Kazakhstan time. Everybody welcome to participate. Thank you. Take care of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.